It's Writer's Dream Time again. For those of you who have not seen the show before, this is a show where authors are able to talk about how they write their books, how they publish them, and how they market them. You can see the show on YouTube. Just look for The Writer's Dream. And also we have a Facebook page called The Writer's Dream, where if you are interested in asking a question or being on the show, message me through that Facebook page. Today's guest is Pauli Libsohn, and Pauli has been here before, and she has edited and produced a book of her mother's writings called Immortal Kisses, and her mother is Mitzi Libsohn.
Correct. Yes.
So tell us about this project, because this is the first book of a series that you're going to produce. So first tell us about your mom.
Okay. My mother was a very sophisticated, creative, artistic woman, and who really did not know that she had this talent. She discovered it quite by mistake, let's say, because I had a homework assignment at college, and they told me to write a poem. And I really didn't know how to go about doing that. So when I came home, I said to her, I said, look, I said, could you please help me with regard to this? And she said, look, she said, try your hand at it and come back to me and show me. So I did. And she said it was fine. But I was so nervous about it that the title that I gave to the poem was Imitation of a Poem. Because I really had no idea what I was doing.
If someone had asked me to write a poem in college, I would have dropped out of college.
I know. I was so nervous.
Yeah, well,
it was incredible. So she said, just go in and hand it in and have the confidence. So I did. And then when I came home that evening, she said to me, you know, she said, you gave me the idea to write a poem. And I said, you're kidding. She said, no. She said, sit down and I'm going to read it to you. And with that, she read me this poem called Duet, the very first poem she ever wrote. And I really didn't know where all this talent came from, and neither did she. She didn't know that she had this. So with that, I was stupefied, so to speak. And then because of that, she started to write poetry. And practically every night when I came home from school, she would say to my father and myself, sit down, I want to read you something else. And we listened. And what happened was, over a period of about 35 years, she kept writing these poems. And she would read them to me, and I would say yes or no, and I'd help her choose the title, and I would type them up with her. And we would do this, as I said, over a period of 35 years. And then one day, I bought a book of Robert Frost's poetry. And I was reading it, and all of a sudden a light bulb went on in my head. And I said, you know, I said, my mother's poetry is just as good or better than Robert Frost's. So I went downstairs into my parents' room, and I said, look, I said, you're not going to believe this, but I've been reading Robert Frost, and I sincerely believe that your poetry is just as good. So with that, I got out her whole box of poetry, and I started to read it, and she started to listen. And she said, you know, she says, you're right. She said, my poetry is fabulous. And then I said to her, I said, we're going to work on a manuscript. I said, we're going to get this published. So with that, we did, and we started on the manuscript. She came up with the title, and then what happened was she passed away. So then I put it aside for about 3 years, and then I got it out, and I said to myself, I made a promise to my mother, and I'm going to get this published. And I did. And I became the editor. And what happened was I had to put all these poems together. And I thought it was going to be a very simple process, but it's not, because an editor is just as difficult as a writer, because I had to figure out the type of punctuation that she would have wanted. I also had to finish, I'd say, about 20 to 30 poems. And I had to finish them in the manner in which I thought that she would. I also had to come up with titles. So it was a very big process, but it was very rewarding. So
Now, what's the format of the book? Did you include stories? Did you remember things that were going on in her life when she
yes, I did.
created some of these poems and read them to you?
Yes, I did. Now, most of these poems in the book, they're about her love affair with my father. Thus, the title of the book. She had come up with Confessions of a Poet. I came up with Immortal Kisses.
No, I like this better. Immortal Kisses
Yes.
is beautiful.
And Immortal Kisses, she wrote a poem, Immortal Kisses, and that's commemorating the start of her love affair with my father that started on the beach all those years ago. And what happened was that she was a 12-year-old girl, and she went to the beach at Far Rockaway back in the 1930s.
Ah, yes.
And, and my father was a lifeguard there, and he was 17. And she fell madly in love with him. Love at first sight at 12 years old.
12.
And it was unbelievable. And it was then that she said to someone that she was going to marry him. But she had to get his interest. So what she did was she decided to bring books to the beach, and she really assigned him stories and books to read. And they would discuss these books all the time at the beach.
Well, your father is an exceptional human being.
Yes.
That he would, at 17, take the advice of a 12-year-old and read the
Couldn't
books.
get over
that
it because she wouldn't let him go. She never let go of him. It was a riot. And she did this. She would go to the beach for about 5 years. And this is what ensued every year. However, at the end of each summer, she would load him up with books to read over the winter. And then she would write to him to see what his reactions were. And he would write back to her.
Well, that's...
It was amazing.
Yeah, it is amazing.
Yes. And they were never apart, really, quote unquote. And so many of these poems are about that love affair. Also, she wrote about nature because she had a love affair with nature. And she loved the birds, the bees, the flowers, the trees, and she couldn't get over the beauty of a flower. She couldn't get over how that flower was created and the petals, the colorations, the formations, and also of the trees and the birds. And she really had a relationship with all of these creatures, so to speak, and the plants.
How old was she? I'm
That's
fascinated
okay.
by
Yes.
this love affair. How old was she when she married your father?
They got married in 1945. She was born in 1922, so she was 23.
Wow.
Yes, but what happened was that World War II started. So that created a crunch, so to speak. And my father was trying to stay out of the Army only because he was the sole supporter of his mother. His father had passed in 1929, and there were no relatives. So it was just he and his mother. So without him, my grandmother, his mother, would have been all alone, and she couldn't have survived. So because of that, the Army delayed drafting him, and then they kept him stateside so that he could be with his mother. And it worked out really perfectly because my mother used to travel around the country visiting him. And then in 1945, he was let out of the Army, and then they got married. And that's really what held them up. But it was always the two of them forever and ever.
Yeah, that's very sweet.
Yeah. So, and then my mother wrote about people that she knew also. So I'd like to read some of these.
I'd like you to read.
Yes.
Please.
Okay. Now, one poem in here, Where Have the Wild Geese Gone, is about her honeymoon at Lake Winnipesaukee in Vermont with my father. And I'll read that to you. Where have the wild geese gone, whose cries broke the silence and filled the stillness of the night, when once you held me in your arms and we listened? Where is the moon that floated through window panes, crossed and recrossed thresholds, and gave new meaning to the mysterious night as you lay beside me? And oh, my love, where is the unforgiving wind that whistled and sang through eaves, blowing away with its songs, and settling its chill on the passion that lay in your last kiss. Here's another one about the honeymoon. I heard a bird singing. While half asleep in the arms of my beloved, I heard a bird singing, and the song flowed from tree to tree, and the trees swooned and sang with it, and it fell like dew on every blade of grass, and it melted snow on mountains carved like statues. And on this night, it crept like a shadow where we slept, and rested with us. Its sweet melody rose and fell with your breathing, and it tangled with the moonbeams in your hair. And in the morning, it became your voice when you wakened and calmed me with your kisses. Isn't that
And she was what, 23 when she was?
23 when she got married, but this poetry started only because of
because of you.
my assignment.
And that she remembered all that
Right.
in such detail.
And all this was pent up in her, and it all came out because of that assignment. And also, I'd like to read Memorial to Love. How we loved the moon all those nights when you cradled me in your arms, and the breath of our longing surrounded the swans who climbed out of the lake to stare at us like ghosts. And when we looked in their eyes, we saw years flooding out, years that never warned us that nothing lives long, not even the messages of love moaned low by the bullfrog at midnight. Isn't that something? Another thing, she always wrote about April. And the reason why she always wrote about April was because they got married in April, and everything started in April. Also, she always wrote about the beach, because everything started on the beach.
Mm-hmm. Rockaway.
Rockaway, far Rockaway. And I'd like to tell you about the cover of this book, because I feel that a cover is extremely important, because it draws the reader in. And I really didn't know how I was going to get a sensational cover for this book. But I felt that the pictures of lakes would be something that I could investigate, because I felt that lakes portrayed romance, mystery, and poetry. And so I went on to the website for lakes. And I scrolled down, and I was shocked, because when I went on the website, they said 33,000 pictures.
Oh,
and
yeah.
I said, how am I ever going to find something?
I know.
So I was scrolling down, and all of a sudden, this picture stopped me. And I looked at it, and I said, well, maybe. And I said, I didn't know. And I kept going. And nothing struck me like this. And I came back.
Well, because of the way
Yes.
the pier is, it draws you into the lake.
Yes, it's hypnotic. And you want to know what's at the end. But the thing is that when I clicked on it, the title of it is Dock at Lake Winnipesaukee. And Lake Winnipesaukee is where they had their honeymoon.
Right.
And the number of the picture was number 26. And they got married on April 26th.
That's amazing.
Is amazing. Yes. And I said, there's the cover.
Oh, boy. I don't believe in coincidences. I really don't.
It's amazing. Yeah. But I felt that it denotes all of those things.
Excellent.
Yes. And now I'd like to read I'd like to read a poem that she wrote about her beloved grandmother, who had a tremendous influence on her. Blossoms on the vine, cradle songs remembered, lullabies recalled. Skin crinkled like crepe, she was the flame, the sentinel who guarded us, the cupbearer, the ancient monument, the flinty heart, the mitigative influence, the ethereal fluid flowing in from the stars. We were flowers clustering around her. She was the river that enfolded us, the steady ray of light that shone, the brilliance that flowed sweetly over us. Innocent as a meadow plant, her face appears in the morning star. Her nearness is a gift at daybreak that twines itself into just-born leaves. Her nearness in space exists in the passage of time between two full moons. She is the perennial plant, flawless as a buttercup. Hers is the voice that floats out over rivers we never got to know. She is disguised in the hard wood of trees, sweet-smelling pine and birch. Redolent of sage and smoke, she is the capstone on our hearts. and we who are all alone hunger for her love.
That is really very beautiful.
Isn't that nice?
Grandmothers are very influential.
Yes. She had a tremendous effect on her, and she spoke about her for her entire life. And also, I'd like to read some examples of the poems that she wrote about birds and nature. Let me just get this here. Broad-billed birds. Surreal shadows in the foggy light of morning, and spring to life as broad-billed birds. Ornately costumed in fragrant feathers, they stare out from wide oval eyes that are full of secrets and scurry along a wet beach on tall broomstick legs. Mimes at play, they pair off like dancers to the merry cries of the ragtag flock. Gracefully scraping the shell-thin sand, they leave a frieze of footprints that is soon washed away by the salty licks of the hungry tongue of the silent sea. And she wrote a lot about birds. And I'd like to read another one. I can find this. Little Blue Herons. A bewitching audience of little blue herons ceremoniously gathers for a princely parade. Witty, vibrant harbingers, they walk in satin slippers, murmuring sibilant sounds. Their sighs mingle with glances from smoldering eyes as they bend and curve on undulating walks. Suspicious, they meditate on mysterious sounds and are stunned into a ruffle of feathers as winter, warlike, makes an abrupt entrance, cracking its whip in the sunglow. It unveils the harsh finale to the unfinished song of this sweet day.
Do you ever watch a heron? Because
No.
they always look like it. They tilt their heads.
Oh, yes?
They have these long, skinny legs, and they walk in the water, and they look for fish. But every once in a while, they'll stop, and they cock their head, and they look like they're listening for something. Maybe they are. I don't know. I've never spoken to heron.
No.
But that's a very good description of them.
It is.
So this is the first book.
Yes.
Now, where are you going with this project?
Okay, I have a second book, and I believe it will be out about February of next year. And the title of that book I called Songs of You, a Postscript, because it's really a P.S. Mm-hmm. And what happened was, after I finished this book, I did not realize that there were any other poems to be found. But what happened was, I found a box of my mother's writings that I really felt were just fragments. I didn't think that they amounted to anything. And going through that, I was flabbergasted because I saw that they were filled with poems. Mm-hmm. And she never told me about them. I never knew about them. So what happened